Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am Lydia Lutt on behalf of Bethel Temple's Israel Engagement Committee and High Society. We're so glad that you're here to join us for this very important conversation. I'm going to set the scene by letting you know, although many of you already, I'm sure, recognize the faces that you can see, who we have with us on our panel this evening. Gary Starr is currently chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Federation. He's a past Federation board member, past president of Bethel, and up until last year was a longtime member of the Bethel board. Gary is a retired management labor relations lawyer with Shipman and Goodwin. Neil Kochen is a board member with Jewish Community Foundation and Voices of Hope, as well as the Harold Grinspoon Foundation. Neil is a former treasurer of Federation and former Bethel board member, a retired investment professional, and an ardent Zionist. Sharon Efron is past co-chair of the Israeli Robotics Teams program from Bethel and Emmanuel, co-chair of the Israel Engagement Committee at Bethel, and on the board of both of Bethel as well as the Jewish National Fund's Southern New England. She's also a lay leader with AIPAC. She goes to Israel 2 to 4 times a year, spending 1 to 2 months living in the north, and as well as time in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And finally, Robin Santiago, she is currently co-chair alongside Sharon of the Israel Engagement Committee and the Israel Task Force of the Jewish Community Relations Council. She's also a lay leader with AIPAC and on the board of Jewish National Fund, Southern New England. She's a past president of Sisterhood at Bethel and a retired dentist, a longtime West Hartford resident. We have 5 longtime Bethel members with us. And Rabbi Rosen, you all know and needs no introduction. I hand the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Lydia. And I have no qualifications necessary for this evening other than deep admiration for all of the people that you see on the screens in front of you. So thank you, Lydia, as always, for the wonderful, stellar work in helping us to bring quality programs like this together for our community. Thankful also to High Society, co-sponsoring with our Israel Engagement Committee, a committee that has been incredibly active, not just this year, but over many years, that Sharon and Robin have co-chaired, bringing us remarkable programs that have allowed us to have deeper and ever growing insights into the experience of the modern state of Israel, with its challenges, with its dilemmas, and with its wonderful and marvelous strengths as well. And Gary and Neil, of course, Jewish identity is at the very, very core of your experience. You make that your business in so many communal efforts that you have undertaken over the years. And because we are all quite close to the experience of Passover in just a couple of weeks or so, both a daunting and I hope a hopeful and helpful kind of reminder, there is nothing that is more specific and special about Passover than the two-pronged experiences of celebrating our freedom, celebrating the dignity we have as Jews to be able to be our own selves and to be able to walk forward in our history in a way that is commensurate with that which we have as our potential. And as well, the constant references back to the land of Israel. We conclude the Seder with a Shana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, another echo of how through the ages, the land of Israel has been a core part of who we are. So to start us off this evening, I would just like to ask if we might ask our panelists to tell us a little bit about the kind of trip you were on, why you went, what were some of the most important features of that trip. They were not identical trips, everyone will soon learn. So Gary, maybe followed by Neil, if you would begin and just tell us about your experiences.
Sure, thank you. So let me start by answering the question of why I went. So after October 7th, I was obsessively following the news. And the question was, how accurate was the stories coming out that we were hearing? And the question is, what do we do? How do we bear witness to what actually was going on? So when the trip was announced, I was having a Sunday breakfast with my wife, Lee Newman, and I said, I'm thinking of going, to which she said, if you don't go, you're going to regret it. I signed up the next morning. We had been in Israel in March of last year. had witnessed the protests that had gone on over the judicial reform proposals. And what we found in this trip was that this tragic event on October 7th unified a country that had been unbelievably divided. People had come out in ways to provide support where the government was unable to do that. Also, one of the people on our trip, Paul Lewis, when asked why he came, he said he came to give hugs to the 9 million Israelis. And I think that really is a great way to understand a part of the why we were there. In fact, while we were there to support Israelis, they were not only thankful to us and to President Biden for having made the trip to Israel and for supporting Israel, but also wanted to know how we were doing because they were hearing about all the incidents of anti-Semitism in the States, and they were particularly concerned about us in that regard. So let me give you a few highlights of the trip. We had the opportunity to go to the foreign ministry and receive a briefing from two high-level employees of the ministry. One was a gentleman who had worked in Washington, D.C. With the foreign ministry and was gay. The other was a Muslim Arab Israeli woman who was working in the ministry as well. And remarkably, they were feeling that they were unsupported internationally. The LGBTQ community had been silent, and the international women's movement had been silent, and they were really feeling hurt by that because of all the things that Israel has done in both supporting the LGBTQ community and also the equal rights of women, which are two groups that are ostracized and demeaned throughout the Arab world, and yet the world couldn't come to even bother to support them. And even now, support has, even after all the reports of the rapes and murders that occurred on October 7th, the silence has been rather deafening. One of the things that we also visited with was brothers and sisters in Israel. This was a group that had been leading the judicial protest movement. And on October 7th, they turned on a dime. They were all connected with, I think it was about 15,000 people on their WhatsApp. And they were able to mobilize their members in order to help reservists get to their bases. Remember, the October 7th was a Shabbat. The buses weren't running. People were spread out all over the country as reservists, and they were able to get them down in the Gaza envelope within hours. So that was the kind of response that they could muster completely. Along with brothers and sisters in arms, United Hatzalah, which is a organization of first responders. They even respond before the Israeli Red Cross, Magen Adom. Their plan is to respond within a minute and a half to any emergency in the country. They have this fabulous facility that has the map of Israel that lights up where all their volunteers are, and all their volunteers are available 24/7. And on October 7th, when they heard of the injuries that were occurring along the Gaza envelope, they responded immediately, sending hundreds of people down there to save lives, to keep people, prepare them for evacuation. And in fact, they suffered, several of their people died as a result of their actions. If you're going to talk about, and tell me if I'm running along, so just, signal me if I see. We also visited Mount Herzl and where the National Cemetery is in Israel. And there is now a new area that is dedicated to these soldiers who are dying as a result of this Gazan war. And it is an overbearing stillness, as well as just depression as you see the tombs of 19 and 20-year-olds who have lost their lives in fighting for the state of Israel. I think I'll leave it at there, and I'll save some more for further questions.
Thank you very much. And yes, for those who are viewing us, please do feel free to put questions or thoughts into chat. Thank you, Lydia, so that as we go along, we can hear what you're thinking about and what we might be able to pass on to our panelists. Neil.
Thanks, Rabbi, and thanks for Bethel for organizing this. I think that this is incredibly important. It's not the first webinar and talk that we've all been on. And part of, I think, what we all came away with was the need to bring back our stories back to our local communities. It's impossible to convey the depth of the emotion, the scenes that we saw, the resilience of the people of Israel. But even if we can just share just a little bit of our experience, I think it's incredibly important for all of our friends and neighbors back here in the States. I had a very similar experience to Gary post October 7th, watching the news, wanting to get involved. My wife also said to me, not just you should go, but you have to go. But I was fortunate to be able to attend the rally that Federation had put together on October 9th, which was the Monday, the 2 days after the horrible events of October 7th. And the turnout there was just incredible, and the strength and the resilience demonstrated by our community was really something to be very proud of. But as we were walking out, there was something missing about just being in West Hartford. And I remember going up to David Warren, and I said, David, whatever you can do as a federation, you have to put together a mission, a trip for the people that need to go and want to participate and see firsthand. And I'm not claiming that was the impetus, but we were just very fortunate that our federation was able to put together such a meaningful trip. I was struck by, I think some of the lasting memories are just the contrasts in many ways of what went on in Israel. We saw sheer pain and horror of meeting with individual people, whether it was at the kibbutzim, and I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, whether it was just the evacuees that we met that talked about their story, whether it was the people at Hostage Square that were talking about their individual families. We actually met, and we were, as a federation mission, we all met with a woman who had lost her daughter, who was one of the spotters outside of the kibbutzim that were keeping an eye on activity. And they were like the first line of defense. And she lost her daughter, just a beautiful 19-year-old woman. And it was really as painful as can be that this woman told us the story of her daughter and her life and wanting to be remembered. But in contrast, we also witnessed firsthand the resilience and the creativity of the people of Israel. This, in some ways, broke the country and revealed some of the underlying misguided nature of their policies. And I'm not even talking from a political perspective, but the being lulled into a false sense of security with the technology that they've used, with their ability to develop the Iron Dome and David's Arrow and the other monitoring devices, sort of led them to a false sense of security. And the people, I think, are deeply scarred. But at the same time, as Gary pointed out, they turned on a dime And it was like a self-organizing organism that they took charge, whether it was a bunch of guys getting together and saying, hey, the Army doesn't have enough tanks because the military had been focusing on their Air Force, on drones, and on technology. And so the allocation in their defense budget to the tank element had been declining over the last 10 or 15 years. And as we know, tanks take 1 to 3 years from the day you decide to purchase them to actually bring them on and to train people on them. And here was a couple of retired tank commanders in the IDF. What they actually did is they called a couple of buddies and said, we've got tanks that have been decommissioned that are spread around the country. These are not the highest tech tanks. They're not the latest version of the Merkava 4. But they were able to commandeer, I think it was 100 tanks, and they made 35 working tanks by taking parts off of these decommissioned tanks that were spread around the country. And they are now a very important part of what went into Gaza as a separate tank unit being operated by these former tank commanders. We saw people organizing food distribution and organizing clothing distribution, and they weren't waiting around for FEMA or the Israeli version of FEMA for the government to take control. It engendered and created such pride in the people of Israel and their drive to be proud of their country and to take charge, even when their top leadership, both at the government and at the Army level, failed them on that day. That really gives me tremendous hope. And so the contrast is what stays with me. It was really people say, did you have a good time? And I would say, no, I didn't have a good time. We had a very heavy and a meaningful time. And that was, I think, my lasting memory.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Sharon, if we could turn to you.
So my story is different. As she said in the beginning, Lydia said, I was going anyways. I had bought these tickets February of last year, or March of last year. So on October 8th, everybody said, are you still going? And I said, we'll decide up until February. And of course we did. We had to change plane tickets because airlines were not always participating. They're a little skeptical, but El Al has been consistent. So we're making it work. And we got on the plane and we got there. I would definitely agree with Gary and Neil that definitely saw a change in the people that were there, from the torn apart political to a pulled together, very nationalistic feeling. Also, I would mention that I saw, besides my week of volunteering, I was there another week and a half. There was a sense of normalcy. You know, when you're walking down the beach in Tel Aviv, the restaurants are open and people are eating, but with an overlying sense of sadness and another overlying sense of anger. They're very mad at what happened, mad at Hamas, mad at the political reasons that it happened, mad at what others' behaviors are doing. Yet they also kind of pull together. And that was an amazing thing. And I was saying that my girlfriends told me that they love that Americans will immediately see and feel and pull out their checkbook and write checks. And we did, and they need it and they so appreciate it. But they said culturally, that's not what an Israeli does. An Israeli just rolls up their sleeve and goes to work. So when they see people come with the Federation or just come over because they simply are just being there, never mind the work we did, this is something. So here we have some pictures of me. This was doing the volunteer work, picking lemons. Robin, I know, was picking oranges. We planted trees. I painted. We made food for soldiers. We were trying to get the places were around the Gaza area where they were opening it up on March 1st to come in and to just make it look a lot nicer when they came home, get these trees off the lemons so that these farmers could sell them, could have income so that their food wasn't rotting on the trees. And it was such a bond of the people that we went. They're just lovely people that went. And it was a great experience for us as a team, and so heartwarming, and a great experience to be with my friends and see people But I will tell some more stories later, but I'm going to pass this on to the next person, which is Robin.
Okay, so I went at about the same time as Gary and Neil. That was mid-January. I did a JNF trip. I did actually 2 JNF volunteer missions back to back, and it overlapped with the Greater Hartford Jewish Federation trip, which gave me the wonderful opportunity to spend some days with Neil and Gary and the rest of their group and do some of the things that were not offered on our trip. I went because I had to go. Everyone else is telling you. You think in life about what kind of a person you want to be, who you are, what do you stand for, and what kind of legacy do you want to leave for your children? I wondered what I would have done had I lived in World War II. Well, here was my chance to answer that question. And thinking about what time of the year it occurred, one word that came to mind was hineni. It all of a sudden meant something really different to me. Here I am. Here I am. Here in Israel, here to help. And I've been studying Talmud lately, and another phrase that came to mind was Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh B'zeh. All Israel is responsible for one another. So I have the American side, I gave money, and I have the Israeli side. I rolled up my sleeves and wanted to go to work. And this is in my life how I deal with difficult times, one being our son's accident, which left him in a wheelchair, my brother's death. These are times in your life where you feel just an overwhelming sense of sadness and grief. What I do is I take all of that negative energy, I stuff it deep inside, as deep as it can go, and I turn it into action. And I saw that in the Israelis, so I really understood what I was seeing. And I think what Sharon said really expressed it. There's this total underlying deep sense of sadness and anger and grief. And yet you have to roll up your sleeves and go on. And the Israelis will tell you, ein brera, there's no choice. They have nowhere else to go. If they don't fight for this land, if they can't live there in safety, they're really in trouble. So I really think the tragedy of October 7th can't be underestimated. Israel, despite the fact that it's 7 million people, it's like a family. There wasn't a single Israeli that we met that didn't know someone who was killed, kidnapped, or wounded. And so everybody wants to help. In the face of this catastrophic failure by the government and even our vaunted IDF, the people of Israel, in my mind, are the real heroes. And their way that they sprang into action is just amazing. As Gary told you, the brothers and sisters in arms who the day before were protesting took all of that organizational ability and formed what they call chamals. That's an abbreviation for Cheder Milchama, or war rooms. And they said, okay, what can we do? There was one that they started in Beit Kama in the south, not too far from Beersheba, which immediately embraced the people in the southern Gazan envelope communities. They brought them in, they fed them, they had psychologists there. So it was a holiday. There was no public transportation. They realized that. They drove soldiers to home to pick up their uniforms and weapons, and then drove them to their bases. So it really helped. You know, there was a long delay in the response, but it would have been worse had they not helped. Everywhere in Israel, you see soldiers, young men, young women, tall, short, blonde, black-haired, dark-skinned, black, Druze. They're the most beautiful things you've ever seen. And every time I saw one, I made an effort to talk to them. And then I would ask them if I could hug them. And in my heart, I gave them a blessing because they're like our children. And that is also something that I think we were helpful for. We could listen to their stories. They needed to be heard because they felt so much that the world really wasn't listening, but we could listen. And I felt that while I helped them, they helped me. They helped me realize we have something to face here. The horrible resurgence of anti-Semitism, the use of Israel as a scapegoat once again. It's hard to face when you're here. And when you go there and they embrace you, that gave me a lot of courage and strength, and a feeling of comfort for me. And it's great to put your hands to work. As Sharon told you, we pruned olive trees, we pulled weeds, we burned debris, we planted flowers, we planted vegetables, we harvested fruit, we sowed grass, we painted, we got dirty, and we had a great time. And the nicest thing that happened to us is the first week that I was there, our JNF group spent 2 days fixing up a little park in Kibbutz Erez, which is right next to the Erez crossing, which, by the way, was destroyed by Hamas at the beginning of the war, and Israel is reopening as we speak. So we restored a little park they had. We planted, we painted, we sowed grass, these big rolls of grass, and it looked really cute when we left. The next day, the few residents, the essential residents of the kibbutz who were still there, and the soldiers who had been stationed on that kibbutz to watch the border called us and said, we had a barbecue in the park, and we smiled for the first time in weeks. And we cried while they smiled. And it was the nicest thing that anyone could have said to me. We really felt like we made a difference. And in some ways, I felt when I was there, it was like comforting people at a shiva. But Israel is not sadness. Israel, I would have to say, my biggest takeaway is the incredible resilience of the Israeli people. And I am so glad to have been part of that. And I can't wait to go back.
Okay, thank you so much. Clearly, we can see how powerful this experience has been. It has touched all of you very, very deeply on a very personal level, and has really pulled on the heartstrings of your existence as people, as Jews, and much more. We do note that, and the Jewish world has noted that yesterday did mark the 6-month anniversary since the beginning of the war. Much has happened since that time. Time in itself has a way of perhaps changing some perspectives that people have, but there's something quite enduring, I'm sensing, I'm sure others do too, about the impact of that trip, even if the trips happen to be some time ago. I'd just like to turn for a little bit, and you touched upon this, Gary and Neil. You really were on the front lines. If there is something additional that you might be able to add for our understanding based on that kind of experience.
Sure. So we had the opportunity to go into 2 kibbutzim on the Gaza border. One was Kfar Aza, which was absolutely devastated by Hamas. Not only were residents murdered indiscriminately, but their buildings, their homes were destroyed. One of the things that I didn't know, and I'm sure some of you may not have known as well, is that their shelters, their safe rooms, don't have water, they don't have bathrooms, they don't have locks on the door because they're thinking that those are reinforced for rockets coming into and hitting on the roofs, so that when Hamas came into their kibbutz, they were able to attack the people even in their safe rooms. And in one of the homes that we went into, the entire wall was filled with bullet holes that had just been indiscriminately shot at. The walls could come down in many of the places. And in order for us even to go into Kfar Aza, we were required to wear flak jackets and helmets because from Kfar Aza, which is on the border, you could see into Gaza. We could actually see smoke rising up from Israeli jets dropping bombs in Gaza. So it's just a heartbreaking place to be. On a more uplifting part of the story is before we went, our federation made a commitment to Kibbutz Sufa, which is borders Egypt and Gaza. It has about 200 or thereabouts families that live there. And we made a commitment to give them $750,000 over the next 3 years so that they could develop their community. We had the opportunity to meet. These are all communities that had been evacuated. And we had an opportunity to meet with almost 10% of their residents in Ramat Gan, and to hear their stories of what occurred on October 7th, and also what their hopes were going forward. The following day, we went down to Kfar Sufa and toured their facility. They actually had the good fortune that their militia was able to hold off Hamas fighters for about 6 hours before the IDF showed up. One of the glitches in security was that a couple of years ago, the government decided that all of the weapons in the communities along the Gaza envelope had to be locked up in one central location, which meant that when Hamas fighters were coming in, the people there didn't have their weapons readily available. And unfortunately, Hamas knew where the weapons were being stored. These were communities that had employed Gazans in the fields and were well aware of the security restrictions and had provided, apparently had provided that information either voluntarily or under duress to Hamas. This community has the opportunity, had already started to build additional housing, and they want to complete that and add more. And they also want to find a way to create manufacturing operations so that they can employ more people there and not have their residents drive to Tel Aviv for work. Neil, you want to fill in?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad this came up because this is some of those searing images and memories that will live with me for a long, long time, if not forever. As Gary says, we were in Kfar Aza, and the term that kept resonating with me is we needed to bear witness. I was thinking of General Eisenhower on the liberation of the camps in 1945. He is known to have said, we need to video this, we need to film this, we need to document this, because within the next 30 years, people are going to deny that this ever happened, that the soldiers that liberated those camps needed to bear witness to be able to provide testimony to the world of the veracity of what went on in those camps. And in some ways, obviously that has been proven true with all the raft of Holocaust deniers and the people denying the atrocities that happened. And Unfortunately, it didn't come 30 years later. It came about 4 weeks later, after October 7th, that people actually denied the atrocities, that it was just Israeli propaganda, that Israel actually perpetrated whatever went on. And I felt it was our duty and responsibility to be able to go there and film and be able to talk about. As Gary said, it was a hellacious experience watching. One of the things that I recall, our guide told us that as you walk through the kibbutz, first of all, there's a silence and an eeriness that transcends everything. It had been a couple of months from October 7th. Once again, we were there closer to the end of January, so some of the more horrendous evidence of victims had been removed. But on every single home, there were various messages spray painted by the people that were going in. And I remember that on every home there was this triangle, or this square that had been spray painted. And our guide told us that there were really 4 basic things that people did when they went through the kibbutz. These are the Israeli army. And they had to evidence that various places had been already examined. And so first, the people went in and they looked for any survivors, and they looked for any evidence of life that remained in a residence and in a home or in a safe room. And they spray painted sort of a line to evidence that there were no survivors, or whatever survivors were there were actually able to be evacuated. And the next people in were those that were looking for terrorists. And they actually went house to house, and we know that there were terrorists that survived for hours, even after the Israeli army was able to get into the south, that were able to hide out and continue to cause damage and harm. And so the people that went in looking for the terrorists, they actually created another line of the square. Then there was a line of people that went in and examined for structural integrity of the home. The homes had been shot up, they had been burned out, they had been destroyed. There was evidence of such hatred and viciousness that is very hard to describe in house after house. And they created that third leg of the square. And then finally, the people went in and retrieved the bodies. And there was obviously bodies, I think in Kfar Aza, where we went, there was something like 650 residents, and there were 62 people that had been slaughtered, and there was another 19 people that had been taken hostage. And so this was so widespread, they had hung banners of pictures of the young kids and the people that had been either taken hostage or slaughtered, that still resonates with me. And it's just a very powerful image at the methodical way that Hamas went through with that knowledge gained through what I do think is the kindness of Israel and of the Israelis to grant them work permits, as Gary described, that was turned against the poor victims outside of Gaza. In Kibbutz Sufa, as Gary said, they were able to get away much lighter, but we actually went in and speaking and hearing the stories of the actual evacuees, and then going and seeing the homes that they had lived in, and where the armory was, and where the path of the terrorists as they went through the kibbutz, the Sukkot that were still standing, because once again, this was on the last day of Sukkot, and so they were still evidence of daily life, toys in the playgrounds, toys in the homes, the sukkahs that were standing at various houses. It just is sort of a snapshot in time that was just frozen by the invading terrorists. Those are the things that sort of stay with me, and I feel honored and privileged and humbled to be able to come back and talk about it, because it is so important that people be able to see it and know firsthand or secondhand actually what went on that horrible day.
Let me just supplement what Neil said, and that is, these were communities along the Gaza border that had been seeking peace, that they had not only employed Gazans in their communities, but they had taken ill Gazans to Israeli hospitals. They had been reaching out and to befriend them, and the viciousness of the attack is just beyond comprehension. My phone is, I just went from house to house taking pictures in Kfar Aza because I would never be able to describe it. It's just a nightmarish problem of thinking that there was, despite the fact that there was an attempt at goodwill, the response was this vicious.
It struck me also that you look out across the fields and there's Gaza, and it is right there. And these fields are bordering Gaza, and it did not take much for them to infiltrate. There is a military base that was right next door to this kibbutz. And through the military planning that Hamas was able to execute, they were able to get in. Not only did they know where the armory was at the kibbutz with these guest workers, but they were able to go in and disable this military base before going into the kibbutz. It was just striking at the speed at which they did this. I know that there's one, when we got to Kfar Aza, we were spoken to by a gentleman. He may be the mayor of the kibbutz. Gary, do you recall the guy that spoke to us? Anyway, we stood in like an open air. It was like a lean-to. It was like at camp where they have, an open air sort of cupola. And we were standing there, and he was telling us the story. And the kibbutz was there, and Gaza's there, and the military unit base is right there. Subsequent to after I got home, there's a number of these GoPro videos that the terrorists actually took and they broadcast, and you can see them. One in particular, they're going into this particular kibbutz, and they're up on the side on this hill, probably 25 yards away, is this open air cabana kind of structure that we were at, and we were told the story, and these terrorists were right there. They were right there. It was chilling seeing that video after I got back and saying, this is where we were. We were right in the eye of where these people came and slaughtered or attempted to slaughter the innocent civilians. It's just memory after another is just more and more striking for me.
And this provides us with a kind of detail that we don't often think about or don't often encounter. The little things make it all the more vivid and powerful. Robin, you were in a war zone yourself, and do you have some thoughts about degree of safety that you felt in the course of that experience?
Before I get that, if you will allow me, I didn't go to those kibbutz, but I did have the experience of going to Re'im, which is the site of the Nova Festival, where 364 young people who were there to celebrate peace and fun and dancing were brutally massacred. Some were killed while fleeing on foot, others were burnt and slaughtered in their cars, and others when they tried to hide in the shelters. This is the picture of Re'im the way it looks now. The families of the people who died planted trees on Tu B'Shvat, creating this beautiful forest in memory of their murdered children. Each tree is decorated with a portrait of the deceased, creating a very sad and macabre forest. One of the guards that we were with lost a friend here, and we had the opportunity to light Yizkor candles with him and place them at the site. And then the group gathered and we all said Kaddish. And while we were saying Kaddish and the sky was gorgeous, Israeli tanks were firing into Gaza, and with every shot that went off, I just jumped, and I could only imagine what it must have been like for those young people there. And one of the places that they fled to, were the shelters. And again, every bus stop in this southern part of Israel has a shelter, because people here have 10 to 15 seconds to get to a shelter. So they'll often drive with their car windows slightly ajar so they can hear the alarm or even the sound of an incoming missile. So some of about 30 young people fled to this shelter and hid inside, hoping to go unnoticed, but there's no door. And Hamas began to lob grenades inside. Inside was Hirsch Goldberg Poland, an Israeli American, and his best friend, Anir Shpira. And Anir, as the Hamas was throwing the grenades in, Anir would grab them and throw them out. He successfully threw out 7, but the eighth one exploded, killing him and ripping off Hirsch's left arm. Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, is still a hostage in Gaza. It's day 185. Every Israeli knows what day it is. It's on all the newspapers. It's just heartbreaking. And it was really a very meaningful experience to be there with everyone from our group. Many other people were there as well, but we were especially glad that we could be there to support our guard. I didn't get to plant a tree there, but our group did plant trees for Tu B'Shvat. And my tree I planted in memory of my grandfather. So I selected a carob tree. It's also known as boxer. And my grandfather used to love when boxer was in season and he would eat it. And we'd all be grossed out because it smells actually pretty awful. So I'm sorry, Rabbi, let's, about safety. You asked me about safety. So my first night there, I stayed with my cousins in Haifa. And as I'm about to get ready for bed, my cousin says to me, "If there's an alarm, don't worry, we'll come and get you." And I realized that I wasn't going to go to sleep in my nightgown that I had brought. So every night that I was in Israel, I slept in yoga pants and a t-shirt. I carefully placed my shoes, my cell phone, my ID, my keys if I was in a hotel, a bottle of water, my glasses, and a sweater. Because you can't think when the alarm goes off, you just have to act. And everywhere we went in Israel, one of the first things they told us was where was the shelter. There's signs to point. They tell you where you need to be, and it's just a completely different mindset. The first evening with our JNF group, we're going to be traveling on buses, and they told us what to do if a siren went off while we're on the bus. And I don't have to do that in West Hartford.
Yeah, I would say just to echo what Robin says, they were very diligent of, once again, everywhere we went, they prefaced things, whether it was in a building or in a home. It was, and if you hear the siren, we're going to go to the left and we're going to go into the stairway, or we go outside or whatnot. But in an odd kind of way, I felt incredibly safe there. My wife and I and 2 friends had traveled to Israel just the prior May, and we were there, and there was some rockets that had been fired from Gaza, and the Iron Dome was initiated, and we actually were eating lunch on the beach in Tel Aviv, and we saw the entrails, and we saw the rocket be taken out. And a couple of minutes later, a siren actually did go off. This is in May, and we had to evacuate to a safe room. Here, when we were there in January, and after that happened, there was just a continual vigilance to making sure, because there was a reality when that happened. But when I went in January on the mission, there was, in an odd way, I didn't feel that sense of danger. It was, the country had enveloped us, that we were there to show support. And I really got the sense that, notwithstanding the fact that there was a reality of a war going on, we felt very safe of anything going on, and just interacting with the other 10 people that were fortunate enough to go on this mission. There wasn't talk about danger or safe rooms or whatnot. I don't recall anybody talking about that. There was a kind of lightness. Obviously, things were very heavy with the subject matter we were talking about, but it was never about our safety. It was the wondrousness of the country and how they were coming together, and the things that we saw, and the people that we spoke to, and the incredible pain and how people were getting through it. But it was not about the present danger there in January. We all felt, if I can speak for the group, we felt very safe. It was just not on the top of our mind. So it was an interesting contrast from when we were there back in May, where in fact there was no war. There was just a couple of rockets being sent.
I really agree with you, Neil. And when you think about it, since October 7th, over 9,000 rockets have been fired, into Israel from Gaza, and another 3,000 or more from Lebanon. So it is something they live with constantly. And as they said, it's 95% heaven and 5% hell most of the time.
Mm.
And then as a contrast, Sharon and I and our husbands had been to Denver just in the end of November. And in order for us to go from our hotel to the convention center, which was maybe 200 feet.
This was at the JNF convention.
Yeah. And they had wire fences, New Jersey barriers, a fleet of police SUVs, and armed riot police in full riot gear in Denver, Colorado. So I actually did feel safer in Israel, despite the fact that I dressed just in case.
My experience was a little bit different in the end of February. There were no alarms. They were much less warning us about escape, and there was no alarms or any problems when I was there. I went to the Nova Festival area, as Robin did, and I also went to the north. I was in the Hezbollah area, not the Hamas area. I had a friend from JNF who invited me to his home. I drove through to Kfar Giladi, past the barriers of war that most people weren't up there. There were 15 people who lived there who fought, and 15 people doing agriculture with farming or animal care. And they said, just as you had passed through Kiryat Shmona, 4 minutes before you went through, a bomb went through and you missed it. And while we were there visiting, he was on the phone the whole time. And he said, so I think they're going to be retaliating, which means there'll be another retaliation. So let's finish your tea and you can go now quickly. So we drove out. The thing that struck me was, I said, so how far do we have to drive quickly before we're okay? He goes, about 20 minutes. And then we went out for lunch in Rosh Pinat, 20 minutes away, and 20 minutes north, there was a bomb that, a missile that had a long-range missile that had come near us. So that was just crazy.
My cousins called me a couple
So,
of
well,
weeks after I left in
yeah, so
Haifa.
while we didn't hear any, I was going to say, while we didn't hear any sirens while we were there, we visited a girls' high school in Ashkelon, which is about 6 miles north of the Gaza border. The good news was that October 7th, the school was empty. It was closed for Shabbat, but a unarmed rocket came through the school roof and went right down into the first floor, and which was still taped off. The school went, virtual for a couple of weeks and then was back in session. Some of the kids had to take 2 buses to get to the school, and that was took longer for her to overcome her concerns and fears because there's no place to stop on the way for shelter. When the sirens go off in Eshkelon, and the students have 20 seconds to get to a safe room. And this is a 2-story school, and the safe rooms are on the first floor. So you've got to figure out where you're going to go and how you're going to go. In terms of the resiliency, they're back in school, but they're also volunteering. They're cooking meals for the soldiers. They're doing agricultural work as well. So there's that resiliency and that commitment to continue to live as best they can.
Robin, was there something else you wish to add at that point? I want to make sure.
Oh, I was going to say a couple of weeks after I returned home, my cousin called me. Their house is not too far from a naval training center, and rocket struck a home about 5 houses away from them.
An incredible part of a routine. It really is. It's a stunning thing. To switch gears a little bit, if we could, There's been discussion, we mentioned before that we're 6 months out from the start of this horrible conflict and terrible situation. We're seeing returned demonstrations on the streets. There's a debate that seems to be going on within the country about what to prioritize, the freeing of hostages, the destruction of Hamas. What are you hearing? What are you hearing from friends, from family, with respect to what Israelis are saying that the mood that they're feeling right now about these kinds of very difficult dilemmas?
Yeah, I would just, I have not been in touch with anybody that we met, sadly, on the trip. I just haven't been in touch with them, but I do have 20 to 25 family members that live in Israel, and I've got 3 or 4 that are in the reserves. Either cousins are too old or children of cousin are too young. But there are 3 of cousins or cousins-in-law of mine that are in the reserves. And so it's been incredibly difficult on the family. And through a number of WhatsApp chats, the family has come together and be able to talk with each other. And I think to some extent, there was a bit of a relief when the reserves, many of them came home and they began to be rotated. And so initially, in the first several months, the call up was made. We all know that 300,000 reserves were called up and 460,000 people came. And that's why there were shortages of helmets and vests and food and equipment. That also shows sort of the spirit of Israelis. And I think after the first couple of months, they were able to draw down some of the reserves. And so there is a bit of a relief. And I also think that some of the successes that have been broadcast, whether it was the arrest of 300 or so terrorists in the hospital in the north, that was recently publicized, the fact that they did get 50 or so hostages home as a result of the pauses earlier on in the war. And so there are elements of good news in a sense. But the sense that I get in talking to my family is the resolve and the strength has not waned at all. They know that with 100 to 150,000 people still displaced because of the war, that is not a sustainable situation. That Israel won't be Israel and it won't be safe until all of those people can go home, and they cannot go home while Hamas has a possibility of governing 1 inch of Gaza. And so there are elements of humanitarian aid that have to be addressed. There are elements of the accuracy of the fighting so that they don't have the tragic errors that we saw a week or so ago. But I don't think the resolve of the Israelis, at least of the family members that I speak to, of the need to finish this. The hostages are incredibly important. I wear one of these every day wherever I go proudly. And it's important. I'm just amazed that the world is virtually silent. 134 men, women, and children are being held hostage. It's now over 6 months, as Robin pointed out. And you can't find mention of a hostage in 50 of the leading publications around the world for the last 30 days. There's been no mention of the hostages and the need to make sure that they're okay. They're getting fed, they're getting cared for, they're getting the medical attention that they need. It's just fallen off the radar. And so that clearly is a focus, but I do think that there has been no diminishing focus on the need to complete the war.
Thank you. Thank you. And Sharon, I know you had something to say to that question as well. And perhaps after that, we can hear some additional final thoughts from our panelists.
I don't have a lot of blood family in Israel, but I have a lot of people from the robotics team and from Michael, who has sung at Bethel, who was living on the Gaza border and is now displaced in Tel Aviv. So I have that perspective. I have friends in the Jewish areas of the West Bank, and then my town I live in at home. The general thought among all of them was the diversity that was happening before the war and the pull together that everybody has mentioned here. That is absolutely incredibly strong. They're proud of each other. they feel like they're pulling for Israel for one country. They also agree with what Neil said. This is not sustainable. They're waiting for the government to make decisions. I don't think anybody wants a radical change now. I think they just want this to be done. I read in the paper today that 83% of Israelis want the job finished with Hamas, and the average Israeli expects that there are only about 60 to 70 of the hostages alive. They would want the deceased bodies back. So it's not there, and they just want this back. They want this done. And they were sharing with me that at their Passover tables, they will be having some symbol on the table or an empty chair, as some of us has discussed earlier before we were on together, because it's a great idea, and they just aren't going to rest and until they feel that they can trust again, trust in each other, trust in their government, trust in the army, trust in their neighbors. And they don't see it coming soon, but they feel that they have each other. And when anybody shows any support, they feel very strongly about that. So they're very happy to have that. So I will continue with my final thoughts, and then I'll pass it on to the team there too. It is the things that give me hope that when we go on is the support of a lot of Christian friends. What's changed me, I've been posting every day on Facebook, something to motivate. And the online support that makes me the happiest, but I've got a lot of offline support too. Working with a couple of groups that are doing that. I've done some talks. I know Robin's done talks. People are interested and they want to know better what's going on. I'm so impressed with the work that JNF has done. I'm so impressed with the work AIPAC has done and other organizations to just make sure that Israel feels safe, remembered and supported and rebuilt and motivated. And I would love it's never going to be the same. Everybody feels that way. It's never going to be the same. Everybody's life is affected, and that's going to happen. That's going to happen going forward, and how we'll all be changed going forward it's not going to be the place that I went to last spring, but I would never not go back. It's a second home to me. And I'm happy you're all here and that you can hear what you can do. So don't forget to keep writing checks. Don't forget to support. And if you want to do that, ask any of us about the groups that we're in, and we will be happy to tell you how to get involved.
So if no one's going to jump in, I'll jump in. So first, let me say that it's important to recognize that our community, through our federation, raised $7 million since October 7th. That is a remarkably generous fact. When the National Federation was looking to what they were going to expect from our community, it was probably in the $2.5 million range. So for each of us, there is certainly a pride of our engagement. One other, just sort of a brief political statement. People are wondering, you hear all this hatred towards Bibi Netanyahu and why his government is still in place after this monumental failure of the government. It has to do with coalition government, has to do with his parliamentary system. In order to bring his government down to get a new election, 5 people have to abandon the coalition, which really means 5 people in the Likud would have to do that. And you don't vote for individuals in Israel. You vote for a party, and the party rank orders the people in the party so that if you only get 16 seats, the top 16 people get seats, and anyone else down below that doesn't. And so those people who might abandon Likud would never get on the Likud ballot again. They might have to join another party, but no one's out looking to join and jump yet. So that's sort of the factual reality as we follow the politics of Israel. Look, Israel had this incredible trauma. And in fact, even when we were there in January, it was clear that The country was traumatized. The organizations that support traumatized people were just overwhelmed. The call for help was greater than can be met. And so you've got that as an existing problem and a continuing problem. But at the end of the day, the Israelis are resilient. They all stepped up, even those that were traumatized just sort of took a deep breath and just went on. And that's really the beauty of the country, and the wonder and amazement of the people that are there.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
I would echo much of what Sharon and Gary said. I would say some of the people I've spoken to that have insight into a more macro sense, that October 7th was sort of a glimpse into a world without a strong Israel. That actually for a day or for 8 hours, Israel had been defeated. We can see the people that are sworn enemies of Israel were allowed to roam free and slaughter and maim and rape and torture and mutilate and celebrate and dance. Were able to do that with impunity. And it just highlights the importance and the need for that strong Israel. I continue been struck less by the more macro things that went on in terms of the organizations, the Brothers in Arms, Natal, that is dealing with soldiers with PTSD, obviously an incredibly important organization, Magen David Adom, Friends of the IDF. There's a lot of different ways that one can help. But what resonated with me was just the individual people. And it's the people that are suffering. One of the lasting memories that is going to stay with me, and I probably said that about 4 or 5 times already this evening, is we stayed in a hotel in Jerusalem. This was at the Dan Panorama. It's a hotel near the heart of Jerusalem. People have stayed there all the time. This was one of the 63 hotels that was designated by the government to house evacuated people from the south and from the north. And there must have been 30 to 35 people there from Kfar Aza that were in the hotel at the same time we were. And the contrast was that you had little children running around. They had brought their scooters. They were kicking some soccer balls. They were running up and down the halls. They were in the elevator pushing all the buttons. They were being kids. And we've all got kids, and it's a wonderful thing. But what lasts with me is the look on the faces of the adults. It was sheer terror that they went through, and they witnessed these unfortunate people, and it's a horrible thing, but they were like zombies. There was no facial affect. There was no spark in their eyes. There was no sense of engagement. I got on the elevator one morning, going up after breakfast, and the woman was on the elevator, and it was just very difficult to engage. There's just no words. As difficult as visiting Shiva homes were, there was just no words. And I could only imagine what she had actually witnessed, either herself in a safe room, in hiding, the family members that she might have lost, the close personal friends at the kibbutz she would have lost. It's just seared in my mind that the look of this woman on the elevator, nobody should go through that. The last thing I would say is, Israel, and we all know that they were lulled into a false sense of security on October 7th. And what a number of people have said is, we in the world have been lulled into a false sense of security that was exposed on October 8th. The dramatic rise in anti-Semitism, the things you're seeing on the college campuses, things you're seeing out of some of the members of our government, the things that we're seeing out of the press, it's just as horrendous as it can be. And there's a lot of reasons why sort of maybe it's been amplified and whatnot. I believe it's been there in many ways just below the surface. And what October 7th did is it gave license to the anti-Semitism to be expressed in all kinds of horrible ways. And I think we all have to be on guard and say, there's an expression in Israel, what was can't be. They are not looking to go back to the way it was, because what was can't be. And in many ways, I think that's Jewish communities around the world have to understand that what was can't be. And we have to be ever vigilant. We have to do what we can to work with our non-Jewish community, friends and neighbors, to be able to tell our story so that they have a deeper understanding. It's going to be a never-ending process, but we should never be lulled into that sense of insecurity, false sense of security ever again. So,
Thank you, Neil, so much. Robin, you have the last one.
Well, we've all talked about some sadness. I do want to contribute one small bright light that was one of the highlights of my experience there, and Sharon as well, and that was cooking with Basma. Basma is a Druze woman who lives in a Druze village in the northern section of Israel, not too far from Akko. She is one of the small business consortiums that's headed up by JNF to help support small businesses in the Galilee. And she is like your favorite aunt, and you really want to spend some time with her. We grilled chicken, we cooked mujadra, we made salad, and there she is in front of her restaurant, which couldn't really operate at this time. So she went to Michal at JNF and said, I want to cook for the soldiers. Her husband served in the army, and so did her son. And there she is, cooking 1,000 meals a week for Israeli soldiers. And a hug from Basma will cheer anyone up. I came away from Israel with 3 key impressions. Israel is small and a family. Everyone is suffering. Israel is resilient and compassionate, and they get ahead by working together. Israel does not express hatred, but a determination to win, to make sure that their people can live in safety and security. And everyone we met is willing to pay the price for this security. Our job is to be there to support them and help them. Hineni. Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you so much. Beautifully stated. And I know we're not blessed with lots and lots of time right now, but we've had 2 questions that really speak to the point of what more could we do. Sharon mentioned it a little bit, but as a congregation, some specific suggestions have been put forward, perhaps helping to sponsor Israeli artists who are challenged right now. But do you have other thoughts and suggestions with respect to what would be very helpful for us to do?
There's a group called Lev HaOlam that sells packages of goods from people in the West Bank, and I'm sure there are similar organizations. And once a month to once every other month to once a quarter, you can get a box shipped to you for what they do. It's food, it's jewelry, it's
perfumes, ceramics, handmade stuff,
right, from artists there too. JNF also has a website where they have artists that and people that sell things that were from the north, and they are selling things where they can help the people to buy things there. This is great. There's Lev HaOlam, and then JNF has a store online for people that were doing it. These were the things we were packaging in the boxes. They found people who were displaced workers from the north, more in the Hezbollah area, and taking their products so they could continue working, and then packaging up for the soldiers for goodies for them.
Yeah, I would just say, and just to be sure,
My tree in Israel.
My tree, right, through Bethel.
I would say that we can all give money. There's dozens of very worthwhile organizations where the money is spent very efficiently, very wisely. We have to be careful who we support, but whether it's Natal or Magen David Adom or Friends of the IDF, there's a lot of, but I think what matters, I think most to the Israelis is we have to go there. We just have to go. And whether we can get on our hands and knees and cook the way Sharon did, or paint the way Robin did, or pick oranges the way Gary and I did, that's almost secondary. Everywhere we went, there's a throwaway line that we say, thank you for coming. But it was everywhere we went, there was such genuine expression of sincere appreciation. People couldn't believe we actually got on a plane to go to Israel
and paid money to go help.
Right. And I think people have said Israel feels so isolated. You know, you watch CNN and MSNBC and the BBC and you hear about what's going on at the UN. There is such a feeling of isolation that I think just getting off the plane, just going there, just walking around, obviously, the more one can do, the better, but just to be in Israel and so that people can see English-speaking people, non-Israelis, is such a tremendous show of support to the ethos of Israel so that they won't feel isolated. The economic impact of buying goods is incredibly important. So is the volunteering, so that the agricultural
Tourism is suffering greatly,
right.
so
And I
there's
think
people there
it's-
to come and help.
yeah, I think that's whether people can volunteer or not, it shouldn't stop people from going. We volunteered and we met with people, young and old alike, were there, and it was all so genuinely appreciated by the Israelis.
So I would like to say that I see this as there's a multi-pronged way to help Israel. You can give money, you can give time and energy, you can buy Israeli goods, you can go there as a tourist and spend money and support the economy. You can support AIPAC, which supports a strong US-Israel relationship to give Israel the means with whereby it can defend itself.
Bipartisan.
You can support your local Jewish schools, synagogues, and organizations, because a strong, proud Jew is a strong defender of Israel and the Jewish people.
Okay.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you so much. And if I can just echo something that was shared with all of us who happened to have the good privilege of being at the celebration yesterday for Solomon Schechter, one of the Israeli families that was brought over so that the kids could have a calm and successful school experience. One of the participants from the family said, it's different in the US, in the diaspora from Israel. We understand now how much you have to really work at being Jewish. How there are things that are not as natural. We don't do fundraising, and we don't have all of these volunteer institutions. It's part of the fabric of the country, which is wonderful and it's great. But we have a structure where we have an ability to deeply appreciate what it means to be Jewish, how important it is to share, to build bridges across the ocean and across all sorts of different kinds of lines. So to be able to share that kind of set of priorities and those values is a very, very important part of who we are. And I do echo that we sometimes don't know where to start. We start by deepening our own Jewish selves, learning more, extending our hands more, and becoming an ever greater part of the Jewish people of Am Yisrael. So thank you, everyone. Our panelists, we're very, very grateful to you. Thank you, Lydia, for your wonderful work as always in making it possible for us to create wonderful programs such as this. And we wish everyone a very wonderful evening. And if we don't see you beforehand, a wonderful
Go
sweet.
UConn.
There's also that.
We
That
are
Jewish
recording
tea.
tonight. If your friends or family missed this, feel free to reach out to me and I'll have the recording probably tomorrow. If you have any questions, please send them to me. I know you all have my email address. Please send them to me and I will get them to our esteemed panel to give them, to be able to give you their thoughts. I will give a shameless plug for Morning Minyan is at 7 a.m. if you would like to embrace your Jewish practice. 7 a.m. Monday through Friday, 8:45 a.m. on Sundays, and 5:30 p.m. in the evenings. We would always love to see you there, especially in person, but even online, but especially in person. So, all right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.